We are right at the end of October. My hairdresser gave me the haircut from hell, and I am now struggling to try and find a way to style it so it doesn't look like I am a reject from a 1980s school disco. And it is time for me to go over my 1-star review jar reads and pick the books for November. So let's get down to it. Hey everyone, it's Ray. Welcome to my little bookish corner of the world. And as I said, I am going to be talking while trying not to get chronically distracted by an absolutely dreadful haircut. Excuse it. It had me crying last week. Yeah, that's stupid. I am going to be talking about the books that I read in October from my 1-star review jar picks. And to remind you, they were Worst Idea Ever by Jane Fallon, Lady Macbethad by Isabel Schuler, and Anthony Horowitz's Magpie Murders, the first in a current duology, which will apparently be a trilogy next year. You can actually see the massive, great big gap behind me where I picked Magpie Murders off the shelf. I actually only finished Magpie Murders a couple of days ago, and then to remind myself of how good the quality of writing can be, I watched the TV show, and then I watched Moonflower Murders, the sequel, which was actually really good and made me think not necessarily differently about the book, but it did give me a few thoughts. So I'm going to start with Worst Idea Ever. The review for that was: very much for smug marrieds only, and those who secretly hate their single friends are plotting to steal their husbands. I think that was a little bit poorly worded, but yeah, I did not like this book at all. Was not at all coloured by the review. As a single person, I have been on the end of, strangely, in years gone by, a friend of mine actually stopped talking to me when she got engaged, started inviting all her couple friends over for dinner parties, and said to me, "My other friends will feel uncomfortable because you're single." And it's like, but surely I should be the one that feels uncomfortable because I'm single. I'm not after their husbands. I'm single because I want to be. This is the story of Lydia, who has an online business. She's an artist and she's very good. She is incredibly talented, but she just cannot quite get a break. Then you've got Georgia, who had a fantastic stroke of luck and is a published author for this little character that she created. And though she acknowledges her friend is far more talented than her, she got the lucky break, and she's a happily married woman with a couple of young children. Her and Lydia have been friends for a very long time. And then Georgia, thinking she's doing Lydia a favour, basically catfishes her. And when Lydia realises that she's being catfished, she sets about getting her revenge for what she sees as her friend's pity. I didn't like any of the characters in the book. They are all ugly people. Not ugly as outward appearance. I mean ugly as in emotionally ugly. They are stunted. Georgia, though I think we're supposed to see things from her perspective, Georgia's actually a really nasty person. I mean, she thinks she's doing her friend a great service by creating an online persona that befriends Lydia and starts bigging her up and telling her all of these things about how wonderful her art is and everything else. And then Lydia starts confiding in her about how she feels. And then a conversation occurs where Lydia realises, oh, hang on a second, this is something I only told that online persona, and Georgia's just mentioned it. And I mean, the revenge that Lydia takes isn't actually a really good, which is why I think they're both ugly characters. But Georgia is like, oh, well, when I didn't agree with that person, I just blocked them and cut them out of my life. It was like saying my bitchy comment and then block. And she does pretty much the same thing to this friend of hers, that she is the one that instigated the negative tone of their relationship. And it is horrific. The whole thing is a mess. And I finished this book thinking, A, I don't ever want to read another one like it. And B, if these are the kind of characters that people, if I'm supposed to feel something for Georgia, why couldn't she have been a nicer person? Because she just isn't a nice person at all. I can honestly say, though I don't agree with the 1-star review in its tone, I agree with the 1-star review in its 1-starness, because I don't think this was a good book. I think mostly because I just didn't like any of the characters. And while sometimes with books like Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, you don't like the characters, but the story is so well told and it has a purpose, you come away from it thinking, well, actually, yeah, that's taught me something. All this taught me was beware of friends who think that they're better than you. Because that's what the lesson I took away from this book was. Georgia thought she was better than Lydia, therefore she tried to make a friend in her in faking and bigging up her talent. And then she tried, and I think the thing that got me the most was the point where Lydia is incredibly talented. She's created these fantastic characters. And initially, Georgia, who is published purely by chance, speaks with her agent and then with her publisher and bigs up Lydia's talent. And then when Lydia does this thing, in revenge for what Georgia has already done to her, maybe she shouldn't have done anything, but at the same time, you can kind of see where she was coming from. Georgia tries to end her career. Lydia's career, not Georgia's. Georgia does her utmost to end any possibility of Lydia having a successful career because of something she started. And yeah, the whole thing just made me feel kind of uncomfortable, and bye Jane Fallon. I know that a lot of people really enjoyed this book, but I can honestly say this put me off her writing. And it was just, the characters were so ugly. So that was my first 1-star review jar read, and it was a 1-star review. Next off was Lady Macbethad by Isabel Schuler. Now this is, if obviously most people will know this, it is based on the character of Lady Macbeth from the play by Shakespeare, but it is also, as many will not be aware, Macbeth is based on a true story. There was truly a King Macbeth, as there was a King Duncan who was killed, and it is based in fact. So these characters are historical fact, not historical fiction. Yes, Shakespeare made a great number of mistakes in his work, but they were for artistic license, as I suppose in a way this was. However, the 1-star review says, when an author decides to wipe away several hundred years of Scottish history because it suits their plot better, that is a level of disrespect that needs to be addressed. This book is based before the start of Macbeth. It is the origin tale of Gruach, who ends up being Lady Macbeth, or Queen Macbeth, as she ends up being for several years in the history books. But it is a tale of religious origin. It talks about how Christianity has come in and taken away or battened down the original religions that were rife actually across the entirety of England, Scotland and Wales and Northern and Ireland. But although Northern Ireland does play a part in this, it isn't so prevalent. It is a place that one of the characters runs away to, and it is very much, I think it's well written. I will say that I think it's well written, but I did find that the tale was a little bit muddled and confusing, and I didn't feel any connection with the characters. As I said, I think it was well written, but I don't think that the characters were in any way appealing. Yes, there was definitely a chemistry between Gruach and Macbethad, who's that's his first name. So it is, I'm struggling to think of a way to explain. I didn't come away from the book finding I had enjoyed it. But then you're not always meant to enjoy a book, you're meant to learn something from it. And as someone who has done a lot about the theology and the way that the ancient religions were slowly drummed out of England and Scotland and Wales by Christianity, the timeline felt a bit confused. There was no clarity on when it was based. The whole Macbeth and Duncan was a lot older. He's almost like a playboy in this, who his real queen is there, but in order to make it apparent that the queen that Macbeth that Gruach was to become was vengeful against Duncan, we create this whole, she was meant to marry him, he abandoned her, he got his real queen, the woman who he married and had children with, pregnant while he was engaged to Gruach. The whole thing felt a little bit convoluted and messy. And yeah, I know that there are elements where things are very messy, but it felt too messy. The timeline was a little bit sort of all over the place. And there were elements of history that were played with just for the sake of it. I think if you're going to write something like this, and obviously there is a very, very feminist tone to it, as there is to a lot of historical or story retellings. For example, Fair Rosaline totally played with the story and made it very feminist, and every man was evil, and the only person who was worthy of doing anything was the main female character. And that is how this comes across. I have no problem with it in a lot of stories. I mean, Babylonia, Clytemnestra. I'm thinking of a lot of the stories that I've read where the female character, we're looking at it from their perspective, but at the same time, we aren't then negging on every single male character that appears in the book. And in this case, I think that that's where this story went wrong for me. It was, I'm the only perfect person in this book. Every other character, every man and everyone who's against me is evil. They are really bad. And I found it quite frustrating. So Lady Macbeth I'd actually rated better than Worst Idea Ever, in that it got I think I gave it 2.25. And that was being generous, I think, because the writing was so good. Yes, I didn't like the characters, but the writing kind of made up for that in a way. And finally, my final book of the month was Anthony Horowitz's Magpie Murders, which has been adapted by Masterpiece, I think PBS and the BBC, into a 6-part miniseries. Anthony Horowitz has written a lot of fantastic TV. He wrote Foyle's War, he wrote episodes for ITV's Poirot, he wrote some episodes, I believe, of Frost, Midsummer Murders. He's done the lot. And he also wrote a series of books that my sister's sons, because she did have 4 children, 3 boys and a girl, or she has 3 boys and a girl, none of them have passed away. The boys actually really enjoyed his Alex Rider books. This book is written in a very odd way. It is a book within a book, and I am going to read the 1-star review that initiated my picking this one up, and then I will talk about the book and a little bit about the TV series too. I don't understand so utterly that I'm actually angry at the close of this book. Now, I've already said that Anthony Horowitz writes a lot of stuff for TV. He's also written some, I believe, James Bond and Sherlock Holmes books. The book is a book within a book. And when I think of a book within a book, I tend to think of, oh, there's elements of that other book within it. We get to find out the storyline. No, this book actually legitimately is a book within a book. We have the Atticus Pund book that initiates the whole investigation for 275 pages at the beginning of the book. Then we get the mystery where Susan Ryland, his editor, Alan Coyle's and Alan Conway's editor is trying to find out what happened to Alan Conway, who is sadly, though if you read the book you discover not so sadly he's not a nice person, found dead at the bottom of the tower in his home. And obviously the two are intertwined. As you discover in the sequel, he does very, very similar things with all his books. They are based on real events. And as we read through the Atticus Pund book, we discover that the end is missing. And this is what sets Susan off on her mystery tour to try and find out, A, who killed Alan Conway, but B, where the final chapter is, what the outcome of the book is, so that it can be published. It's her job. She's an editor. And as much as I loved the story and I did want to find out who murdered whom and how it ended, who murdered Alan, who murdered the character in the book, whose name I cannot remember right now, all of that stuff got kind of distracted by the fact that the book was written in a confusing way. It literally was a case of the Atticus Pund book was kind of dumped in the middle of Magpie Murders. And the Atticus Pund book is actually called Magpie Murders. And it turns out that it's because it's an anagram. And the whole mystery of Atticus Pund is that his name is an anagram. I'm not going to spell it out for you because it's very, very rude, but it is a stupid bleep. And if you think about the letters of Atticus Pund and then move them around, you will get the other words. But I found it frustrating, and then I rewatched the series. And the series truly is a masterpiece. And I think that's where this book comes into its strength. It feels like the book was actually written to be a screenplay rather than written to be on the page. And that is its weakness as a novel, but its strength as an adaptation. Because the flicking between the two storylines, the cut scenes and everything else works amazingly well on the screen. It really does. If you haven't seen Magpie Murders or Moonflower Murders, honestly, I would recommend you watch them because they do what the book struggles to. And it breaks my heart because I do like Anthony Horowitz's work. I think he's a very good writer, but his work is so much better for the screen. And I have no doubt that I'm going to find the same when I read Moonflower Murders, because I am going to read it. Having watched the show, I now know who did it anyway, and I know their motive and everything else, which is a bit disappointing, but I couldn't stop watching yesterday, so I literally just carried on watching all the way through. And I think that that is going to be the same as Magpie Murders. I think that both of them are going to have proved to be written with the sole intention of being made as TV shows. And they are good TV shows. They do keep you guessing until the very end. The motives are incredibly clever. The melding of the world of Atticus Pund and his partner and Susan Ryland as she is investigating and trying to figure out what went wrong, they are both done incredibly well for the screen. So those are my 3 books. I gave this one 3.25 because I do think it deserved it, but I do think that it was far better as a TV show. Okay, and now it is time for me to pick November's books. I have, honestly, if I pick out Fairy Tale, I've already read it. I read it yesterday because it's one of my 24 for 24, and if I don't finish it, it's quite a chunky book. So let's pick out a random book and hope that it isn't that one. Okay, it's pinky purple. Perhaps the narrative style just isn't working for me, or maybe this book just sucks. Who knows? That's book 3, and that is The Library of Broken Worlds by Alea Dawn Johnson. And that is a special edition. I think it's this one. Yes. This is my locked library edition of this. It is very, very pretty. And the book itself is: in the winding underground tunnels of the library, this great celestial peacekeeper of the three systems, a terrible secret lies buried. As the daughter of a library god, Frida has spent her whole life exploring the library's ever-changing tunnels and communing with the gods. Her unparalleled access makes her unique and dangerous. When Frida meets Joshua, a mortal boy desperate to save his people, and Nergoi, a disciple from a persecuted religious minority, Frida is compelled to break ranks with the gods and help them. But in order to do so, she will have to venture deeper into the library than she has ever known. There she will discover the atrocities of the past, the truth of her origins, and the impossibility of her future. Okay, so that is book number 1, The Library of Broken Worlds by Alea Dawn Johnson. That's quite a thick book. But then I've had that this month as well, so... Book number 2. I can't believe how much I hated this book. Boring setting, boring characters, boring plot. I honestly wish I had never read this book. Well, that is a very, very strong feeling on that. Okay, so 52. Caraval by Stephanie Garber. I don't even know where that is on my shelf. I will have to, oh yes, I can see it. I will have to find that one. So that's Caraval. And final book. It's a blue one. I present to you a tale of questionable consent. Oh God. Bad boys with amber eyes and foreshadowing so terrible, I predicted every plot twist. 27. Oh, good grief. From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. Okay, so that is the first in a series and it is right on the top shelf. So there we have it. We have Jennifer L. Armentrout from Blood and Ash, Caraval, which is a series I had been meaning to start this year, by Stephanie Garber, and The Library of Broken Worlds by Alea Dawn Johnson. So I am really, really looking forward to all of these. So in a few weeks, you will find out what I think of those, and we will head into the last month of the year with my final picks of 2024. And I am looking forward to it, I think. In the meantime, bye.